Welcome to the Work Trends podcast from Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan Mbiro. Every week, I interview interesting people who are reimagining work. And be sure to check out our Work Trends Twitter chat events calendar located at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Welcome, everyone, to the Talent Culture Work Trends podcast. I'm your host, Megan Mbiro, and today's episode, sponsored by Poll Everywhere, is about powering hybrid work, fostering inclusive conversations, and nurturing employee well-being. We have a distinguished guest with us, Robert Graham, CEO of Poll Everywhere, who's going to be sharing valuable insights on these topics using real-life learnings from the work being done right there at Poll Everywhere. But before we dive in, let's give Robert a proper introduction and get to know his unique journey a little bit better. Robert Graham is the CEO of Poll Everywhere, where he applies his software engineering expertise and a passion for entrepreneurship to cultivate a valuable SaaS product. Robert began his career in software engineering, where he gained critical research and web industry experience. His spirit, and I'm talking about his entrepreneurial spirit, most importantly, led him to Poll Everywhere, where he enjoys leading and supporting an exceptional team. Poll Everywhere offers numerous opportunities for personal growth, a factor that Robert eagerly emphasizes. He's a proud Georgia Tech alum, former Google intern, an accomplished author, and a serial solo entrepreneur. It's great to have you here with us, Robert. Let's dive into this topic, shall we?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much for the introduction, Megan.
You got it. Can I ask you a quick question?
Please do.
Where are you located right now?
I'm in Bellingham, Washington. So I'm just in South Canada, just south of Vancouver.
That's so cool. And guess what? I'm in Portland, Oregon. Small world, eh?
Oh, not so far away, eh?
Absolutely. So listen, recently you published a LinkedIn article about how to make remote work more personal in the modern workplace. What are you seeing are key features of a modern workplace, and how are organizations struggling to create this?
Yeah, I think a lot of the key features of the modern workplace, haven't changed a lot, but our relationship to them changes a lot. Our context has changed a lot. So a good example is even the fact that we're able to do this podcast remotely. A lot of our, work is done remotely these days. And so I subscribe to a lot of the ideas from Daniel Pink's Drive, right? Where people are looking for autonomy and they're looking for mastery and purpose. And I think those things haven't changed so much, but the environment has changed quite a bit. And so how do you build those into an organization's culture? How do you build a remote culture? How do you find ways to teach managers to do that as well? Because once the organization reaches a certain size, it's really not a cult of one person or two people. And find ways to build systems that encourage that and, promote the people that do those things well. And I think there's so many trade-offs here that doing this well really requires consistent listening and curiosity, because some of the things you're going to do are going to be mistakes. And then some of the things you're going to try are just going to also have the context shift on them. And they may not be the right decision for the organization anymore or for the people. And sometimes that takes a few months. A lot of things happened in 2020 where suddenly everything was different. We needed to do a lot of things differently. And then, context shifted again. Somewhere in 2021, we were doing a lot of engagement with the teams on Zoom, and people just started to sour on spending time together on Zoom at all. There's a lot of fatigue. So, then you have to shift again and you have to listen and think about, okay, well, when would it be appropriate to get back together? What are the things people find valuable about these spaces?
Oh, totally. I am so curious to hear your take on the modern workplace. Like, what are some of the key features that you're seeing? Number one, and then I have more questions for you. I have tons, but let's start there because I think we're all experiencing it in similar and then dissimilar ways. So let's break that down a little bit.
Yeah, the key features of a modern workplace. I think what we've seen with both millennials and Gen Z as groups is just more interest in a relationship to mission, more interest in a relational experience at work and with an employer. And so I think those are something that's sort of defined how the modern workplace looks and feels and what it needs to provide for people. I think there's a video out there, I think, where Simon Sinek talks as well about, we used to be involved in a lot more third places. There used to be people involved in Awanas or the Lions Club, or they'd go to church, or they had a softball team, or really, anything like that, right? A lot of that time has been replaced by time we spend online or time we watch Netflix. And so there's a lot less outside things in people's lives. So we're putting a lot of those demands now on work. So a lot of the features of the modern workplace, at least the expectations from employees, are to fulfill a lot more parts of what people were looking for out of their lives.
When I look at workplaces, I'll just keep it kind of big and bold for everybody. I tend to look at how many employees each organization has. And that's part of me just being, a practitioner in the talent and recruiting world, right? That's how I think about culture in terms of size of organization. How do you think about it from that perspective? Does it matter? What's the difference between a modern workplace with 50 people, employees, and 50,000, for example, from your lens?
I think there's a few things that can be different with a smaller place. I think with most smaller places, people are going to be less specialized. Everyone's going to do a few more things, wear a few more hats. And with that overlap, I think it's easier to connect some of those people. It's easier to just have a smaller tribe that's closer knit. I think the difference, though, with a bigger place is you can still have that, but it's going to be, a portion of a department in someone's reporting tree. So I think you can have a vision of a thing for 50 or 80 people that still works at a big company, but it's got to fit into a larger container. Let's
talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, and that is how organizations are actually struggling to create this. Right? It's real.
It is real. I think there's still challenges in terms of, there's some generational differences about, like I mentioned, how we work and what our preferences are for our employers. I think there's some really interesting things in terms of even what we're seeing in terms of like the power that employees and labor are exerting in the space and just the specific dimension of remote work. A number of the largest employers in the country have announced their return to office multiple times, and yet they haven't returned to the office. There's really something going on there. And I think it's clear that there's some really compelling thing for people about reclaiming some of that independence and freedom. And I think we're still struggling with what that means at work, because there's a lot of people at work that still feel like if you're not going to work physically, then work's not being done.
So when you talk about employee engagement in the modern workplace, what are you thinking are the key drivers, and how can we increase all of this?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, we look at things like autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And if you want people to feel engaged at work, then you really need to get them connected to those intrinsic motivators. And so part of that journey starts with asking the question of, what motivates our workforce? How can we enable them to be autonomous? And even like raising it up a level of, do they feel like they have autonomy? Do they feel like they're able to grow and have mastery over their work? Do they feel connected to a purpose? And also, does our organization have a purpose? Have we communicated one that anyone believes in? And yeah, I think it kind of starts with that listening, because I think every organization is going to start in a different place with those questions.
Well, speaking of listening, I heard through the grapevine that your organization is extremely focused on your own well-being. Right? Everybody's well-being. Tell us a little bit more about this, and also what you think more organizations can be implementing and where their focuses should be. There's nothing better, right, than hearing from you, Robert, about your own culture here.
Yeah, I think that we've really experimented with our culture since the pandemic. And some of that was pushed on us by circumstance of going from being 40% remote to suddenly being remote 100% forever. But we've embraced that and really been excited by it. And I think it's given us the opportunity to embrace changes along the way. So we've experimented last summer, and we're in the middle of this summer of doing a 4-day work week for the summer. This year we expanded that to, I believe it's 12 weeks. And, we looked at a lot of different options as far as benefits go. We did surveys about what people might like to see, but this turned out to be one of the biggest ones. We had had some employees talk about it before, and it was something that we're really unsure of, that we thought would be hard to measure and hard to test out. But we decided to take the plunge last year. And as far as well-being goes, the impact was pretty obvious. We have a Slack channel where people just talk about what they did with their summer Fridays. And yeah, it's not always going to Europe or something really big, but it's remarkable how often it's, a sunrise or a new skill or a moment, with dad. And it's really special.
That's awesome. I love that. I mean, it's not only about the big stuff, it's about the little things. I mean, that's where I think that secret sauce is, right? Like you talking about a sunset, boom. I'm like, Robert, you're humanizing yourself by doing that, right? And that's what we want everybody ideally to find, that balance when they go to work, right? Where they can bring their whole selves to work and not feel like, they've got to compartmentalize as much, because let's face it, we're not built to compartmentalize that much. We just aren't. I think we got to get real with it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that we fool ourselves into thinking we compartmentalize.
Yeah, totally. And this is not breaking news from yours truly, but employee well-being and employee involvement do go hand in hand. Talk to us about how Pull Everywhere helps encourage this.
We look for all the opportunities that we can for well-being. So with something like 4-Day Work Week, that figures into, we have an annual survey about employee net promoter score. So that is a view of, would they recommend us as an employer to their friends? And we track that score. We track that score across different demographics, and we try to see if, year over year, we're doing a better job of being the kind of place where people would want to work. Of course, we track other things like whether or not people actually leave, but it's been a really interesting way for us to track over time, how we're doing, and you can do it with different cohorts. People join in different contexts and different years as well. But that's one of the ways we've been able to find either we're doing better or we're doing worse, along with, things like using our own product. I mean, we have a product that we put into the world because we think it makes some positive impact out there, especially in terms of being able to listen. And so we use that to listen in our meetings that we have in the medium-sized groups, as well as in town hall meetings where everybody's gathered together. It's something as simple as just a retro where anybody can offer a topic that everybody can upvote. It gives us a chance to see just what the impact is of, what we're offering people. And then I would say just the why of the organization. Part of what we talk about as why we're around is to be a place where people can grow and build something together. And I think that purpose, that sense of shared purpose at work, is a big part of well-being as well. And just connect back to purpose from the book Drive that we referenced earlier, but that is something that really grounds you in a space, and it connects you to the work in a way that really, if you don't see it, is very difficult.
Well, absolutely. And purpose is so huge. I mean, I have to tell you, I'm just so curious. Like, you're talking about a 4-day work week. What do you project for beyond summer? Because I know if you're out there in the work trends community, my inbox and my DMs are blowing up because there's so many people that need to figure this out. This is big. Like, Robert, you and I could talk for hours about this. I mean, where do you think we're heading there?
I'm not certain. Some of the things about it have been extremely positive, and there have been some things where we're running the experiment again this summer. I think maybe it's unfair to call it an experiment at this point, but there's a few things I think we still need to figure out in terms of how we work. So some of our communications get really cramped by having less time in the week. That thing that you might have answered at the end of the day on Tuesday, that then you actually answer maybe Wednesday late. We have people in different parts of the world and different time zones, so sometimes that pushes things across 1 week into the next week. And those are some small things that I think that can be addressed, and I think that we could be in a place where this doesn't bring our productivity down. But there's some pressure on particularly middle management with summer Fridays for us, where it just seems like the work becomes very intense to hold things together, to plan around some of the difficulties of a compressed schedule that may be more difficult to solve. And so it's possible that a seasonal approach is the best one for us. It's not a heavy part of our business calendar in the summer.
Well, that's a really smart way of looking at it. I love that. Seasonality. Let's throw it out there into the universe and see what people think about this. Listen, time flies when we're having fun. I've got my final question for you today. Can you talk more about what you learned from last year's 4DWW trial and what you've changed for this year?
Yeah, one of the big changes I hinted at before, which is that we moved from, I think, 8 weeks to 12. Another change is we got a late start last year and we didn't look very hard at taking off Fridays. And it turns out that there are a number of holidays in the summer. And so we ended up with a number of 3-day work weeks. So we didn't do that this year. If there's a holiday, then we just observe the holiday and we don't take an extra day off. And that was something all of the employees requested, that 3 days was just too little. And I think those changes have made a difference. We can already feel that halfway through. I think that we're also just really interested in how much of an impact we're able to make in terms of, if there's a change in communication overhead, and if, our general productivity feels like more of a plateau than a slight downward trend. We definitely have observed coming off of last year that our employee retention is up, but it's hard to know. Is that because people love to be here, or is that because some of the tech job market in the last 6 months has been very uncertain?
Well, Robert, we appreciate your transparency right now. Not to use another buzzword with everybody, but you're getting real with the fact that there's a lot going on out there, and the economy and some of that in the tech space is very real. Only time will tell. And you have to keep listening. Listening is so key. I'm totally with you here. And having tools to do this, invaluable. Because at the end of the day, it's about retaining that talent, ultimately. At least from my lens, right?
Absolutely. Some of our years with the biggest challenges were solely because we had key people decide to depart.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thanks for stopping by, Robert. Appreciate your time and love what you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to the Work Trends Podcast, your favorite source for all that's new and exciting in the world of work. If you love what we do here, make sure to share our podcast with friends, colleagues, you name it. And don't forget to tune in for our next episode. Catch up with you next time. Thanks to listening to Work Trends from Talent Culture. Join us every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern for a live Twitter chat with our podcast guest. To learn more about guests featured on today's show, visit the show notes for this episode at talentculture.com and help us spread the word. Subscribe to Work Trends wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a rating, review in iTunes. Share Work Trends with your coworkers, your friends. Look forward to it. See you next time.